we were undercover so much that I just remember looking at this video and just sort of getting these heart palpitations all over again that we're back undercover. So, but I thought that presentation was great. So, I don't know how much of you know about the book that I wrote. It's called Black Market Billions. This is it. And basically, there's a term in journalism called parachuting into a story. And you know, while I'm not a organized retail crime law enforcement executive, or do I work in loss and prevention, I am a journalist and I do cover retail. And when I decided to write this book, it all started from a situation that happened to me. So I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. So in 2007, I was sitting at my mom's home. It was the day after Christmas. And one of my colleagues from this other news organization that I worked for IM'd me. This is all on instant message, and I have the whole conversation written out in my book. I'm not going to belabor you, just tell you exactly what happened in that IM conversation, but the gist is that he tried to offer me 2 handbags. One was a Lanvin handbag, which, you know, retail value was about $1,400, and another Givenchy handbag, which was $1,200. And he wanted me to buy it off of him for $300 and $400. Now, we all know that that's, you know, market, you know, on the fair market, it's not going to be $300 or $400 unless it's fake or it's stolen. So I asked him that. I said, you know, Hector, I just gave away his name, but in the book it's not. His name is Hector. So I said, Hector, what? Sorry, what? What's his full name? You know what? I can give you his IM address after the speech. So he said, Hector, because of what I do for a living, I can't buy a counterfeit or stolen handbag, but I am very interested in this. Where did this come from? And he proceeded to tell me that his friend was part of a ring that was located in Barney's, an organized retail crime ring, 8 people, that would steal from the warehouse and sell it to unsuspecting women like me. It was right at the beginning of the recession. A lot of people were losing their jobs. Women like me, you know, a lot of us also, you know, media, you've heard the joke that everyone who's like out here waiting for the Bryant Park movies in the, I don't know how many of you are from New York, but there's a movie that happens every summer in Bryant Park, and those are all people. You have to wait for your turn to, you know, sit and lay down your blanket. It's all the media people, because everyone in media is unemployed now. So a lot of, you know, a lot of media people at the time were unemployed, and, you know, a lot of women wanted, you have your aspirational, you know, you have your aspirational hopes, and you want to have that lifestyle, that you're unemployed, therefore you want to get cheaper stuff. Now this is what they were trying to sell to me. I said I couldn't buy it, but I was interested. I wanted to know more about it. And he basically said to me that everyone was doing it, and that he didn't want to get caught, but he was saying that his friend, basically, they would steal 20 bags a week, and they wouldn't use eBay, but they would just use their friends of friends to try to sell these bags off. Now, I wanted to do a piece on it for the network. I was doing a lot of stuff at Fox News at the time, but then we decided, you know, as we did more research, that this was more of a book situation, and that the more research that I did, the more I realized that it was funding terrible things: human trafficking, drug trafficking, and terrorism in some cases. So, why do we care about this? Well, obviously, you're loss prevention executives, most of you. You're, you know, private investigators. You work in this industry. But for the average person, and when I talk to the people, you know, who are just like me, you know, we care because it's impacting our economy. It's impacting us on a global level. And so, a lot of you know, organized retail crime is not $1 million, but $1 billion industry. It's a $60 billion industry. And counterfeit drugs, and I know we're talking about stolen items here, but just to give you an example, counterfeit drugs, for example, it's a $75 billion to $200 billion a year industry. Now, I want to talk about internet fraud too, because that's close to about $559.7 million in 2009 were stolen off of, you know, it was a cause of internet fraud, and I'm going to get to that in one second. Also, credit card fraud is close to a $1 billion industry as well, and that's important as I get further in the talk in a little bit. Now, I also want to give an example too. When I was doing my research, I spoke to a woman by the name of Mercedes. Now, I was embedded with the LAPD when I wrote this book, and for about, I think I was embedded with them for a couple months in 2010, and then I went back out with them in 2011. And so they introduced me to a woman by the name of Mercedes. That's not her real name. She's an informant for them on the FBI side. And I sat with her, and she was telling me how this was a family enterprise. Now, it wasn't just, when I mean by family, it wasn't just her and her immediate family. It was her, but she learned it from her mom, who also learned it from her grandmother. And this was something that they did from their country of origin in Colombia. So this was, in my family, my parents are doctors, and my grandfather was a doctor. You know, it was expected that I was going to become a doctor. That's not happening. But in other families, people engage in organized retail crime. That's what Mercedes was doing. Just to give you an example, she lives in this McMansion in the Los Angeles suburbs. You know, you see these, you know, houses that the Hollywood rich and famous. Her house looks sort of like that. And she was making $300,000 tax-free just on stolen merchandise. And she wasn't just stealing merchandise from a Walgreens or a Walmart. She was stealing merchandise from a Neiman Marcus. Okay, when I go into a Neiman Marcus, they look at me up and down. You know, half the time they're wondering why I'm in there. So you can imagine what she had to do, what sort of change in personality in her dress in order to be unsuspecting to go into a store like that and steal $5,000, $6,000, you know, dresses. You know, sometimes she would lift almost $20,000 worth of merchandise in one hit to be able to do that. And it was just going under the radar because she was just unsuspecting, looked like a wealthy woman that was walking in there and just would swipe a bunch of stuff. So anyway, she had another $2 million in cash just hidden in her house. So this woman was really making a lot of money. It made me think, why am I still in journalism? I'm just kidding. Which brings me to my next, here's Mercedes making all this money. And as I was doing more research, I was not only just embedded with the LAPD, but I was also doing a lot of research with the Albuquerque Police Department. And while we're really talking about retail and retail crime coming out of the stores, there's also retail crime that involves auto parts. And I'm sure you've heard, like stolen cars. And I think what was really interesting was that when I was working with the APD, they told me if I really wanted to see the flow of where the stolen merchandise was going, I would have to drive to the border of New Mexico and Mexico. Now, it's just me. You know, I wasn't with the team. I didn't have an attaché from Immigration Customs Enforcement with me. I literally, well, I'm going to explain. I'm going to read to you what I did. Okay. It was illegal, and it wasn't just sort of gray market, gray, you know, area illegal. It was definitely illegal what I did. Okay. I should be telling a bunch of law enforcement officials what I did. It's for the book, right? Okay, so here we go. Back in Albuquerque, Commander Harold Prudencio was about to let me in on a little secret. Leaning in close, he said, if you want to see where most of the organized retail crime happens in New Mexico, look at stolen car reports for the week, then drive over the border. A lot of organized retail crime rings steal automobiles and sell the parts in border towns. It's hard to believe, but with statistics that say the amount of cargo theft that involves auto parts went from 19 thefts in the first 6 months of 2009 to 30 during the same time period in 2010, it seemed that Prudencio was right. To see for myself, I drove to the border town of Palomas, Mexico. Now, if you're thinking Palomas is anything like Cabo San Lucas, Acapulco, or Mazatlan, think again. Palomas borders Columbus, New Mexico, the place where the Mexican revolutionary General Pancho Villa launched his attack on the U.S. in 1916. It's also famous for cheap dental procedures, prescription drugs, and drug wars involving the Juarez cartel. 10 days before I started my trek south, I read that 3 people were beheaded. Their heads were found separated from their bodies in the town square by a priest. A couple days later, their bodies were found charred in a car just outside of town. This is definitely not a safe town. And I was going down there by myself. Okay, soon, amidst blistering desert sun and yucca plants, my luxury car, and I want to fully disclose, and when I was giving this example the last time, my mom was in the audience, and so it was actually her SUV, her Lexus SUV, and I wasn't on the registration or the insurance. I didn't have permission to drive it down to Mexico, but I did it anyway, so that was, I basically stole a car to drive down to Mexico for the purpose of this book. So we were sailing across the border between the U.S. and Mexico. At customs, the nonchalant border agent on the Mexican side took a swig of his Coca-Cola and asked me in Spanish if I had anything to declare. He briefly looked at the car and into my tinted windows, and then let me drive across. He had no questions about my registration or identification. Neither did he check to see whether there was anything in my SUV that I could potentially be smuggling into Mexico. The whole process took less than 45 seconds. I parked the car on a dusty road just a few feet south of the customs checkpoint. I made sure to park on the main street. I didn't know which would be worse, if the car was stolen or if an auto parts smuggler realized I was in Columbus doing undercover investigative work and decided to seek vengeance. I figured my mom's wrath would be far worse. As I wandered around the town's main street, I found several auto parts stores selling what looked like used hubcaps, rims, bumpers, mufflers, and tires, cleaned and on display for less than market value. Most of these come in every couple of days, said Arturo, the owner of the store, in Spanish, as he pointed to a long row of shiny rims selling for just $10 a piece. If I wanted to buy a set of 4, the price would be about $35. And we all know that rims do not cost $35. He explained that there were more styles in the back if I wanted to see them, or if I could wait till Friday and see if new rims would come in. A couple doors down from Arturo's store was another auto parts store. The prices were less expensive, but they sold the same merchandise. But Arturo's store wasn't the only one in Columbus selling stolen auto parts. During my afternoon trip, I counted 11 different stores with shiny hubcaps, fenders, and wheels lining the chain link fence in front of the store. Walking along the dusty streets of Columbus, I was reminded of a story Commander Harold Prudencio told me about Anju Tahir, a Pakistani native who was arrested in August 2009 for committing bank fraud by way of stolen vehicles. Now, I had mentioned bank fraud before, and it's not just stolen vehicles that happens there. I mean, the way this money is transferred is also, with stolen merchandise from stores. So, I'm just going to skip this part here. Okay, hold on one second. So, according to Prudencio, Tahir would apply for a loan and then purchase a salvaged luxury vehicle. He would steal the exact same model and swap the VINs. He would then drive the stolen model with swapped VINs into Columbus. Tahir claimed that he was sending the money back to his home country, although it was unclear exactly which method he was using, hawalas or stored card vehicles, stored value cards, excuse me. Does everyone know what a hawala is? Yeah. No? You know. Okay. Well, we're going to get to that in 1 second. Okay. So Tahir's scheme was just another example of how the proceeds of stolen vehicles are laundered through various means, and in this case, committing loan fraud. Now, crossing back, so I stayed in Columbus for a little bit, and it wasn't just the stolen auto parts that I was looking at. There were a lot of stores there that were selling stolen merchandise from stores as well. So I'd walk along the streets and I would see stolen merchandise from Abercrombie stores, from American Apparel stores, from Walgreens and Prilosec OTC. I think that was the biggest thing that I saw. Even though you could buy prescription drugs in Mexico, you were seeing boxed merchandise, drugs that were being sold at these, off the way Main Street stores. So crossing back into the U.S. was a much different story. The line of cars were long, and it took 45 minutes just to move a few yards. When I finally got to the station, the Border Patrol agent on the U.S. side inspected the trunk, back seat, and undercarriage in meticulous detail. He asked my name, my age, why I had been into Mexico, and how long I had stayed. He asked for my passport. When I didn't produce it, I didn't even think to bring it, he took a long look at me and asked to see my driver's license, which he ran through the system. And I was intimidated, hoping that nothing from my teenage past would sneak up and get me into trouble. It wasn't that bad when I was a teenager, but some crazy stuff happened. After I went through the ringer of questions, I asked the agent why the same due diligence wasn't taken going into Mexico. His reply was deadpan but honest. That's Mexico for you. We can't tell them what to do. So the reason why I wanted to tell you this story is that what I found with the transfer of this money and the proceeds is that it's very easy to get across the border. I mean, it just took me 45 seconds to drive across that border. And I didn't explain, it kind of goes further in my book, but I had big bags of merchandise, just stuff that I found in my closet, put it in the bag. I wanted to see exactly if they would notice if I was driving across the border, and they didn't. And it's that easy. We're not talking about bulk cash smuggling or bulk cash smuggling merchandise, in a Tony Montana kind of way. You remember from that movie Scarface, he had like these big like duffel bags and he was going on airplanes and smuggling that stuff. Like it's not like that really anymore. Mexico doesn't really, and from what I understood, especially in these border towns, if you're just driving across the border, I experienced it firsthand. It's 45 seconds, you just drive across the border and it's sold over there. So it's pretty easy. Now, what I also wanted to talk about, okay, so we were talking about hawalas, and I really wanted to talk about, too, the international movement of money, since we're talking about how organized retail crime affects the economy. So, really, we were talking about hawalas. Basically, someone raise their hand over here. Do you want to tell me what a hawala is?
A neat way to move funds as something of an accounting back channel for payment for goods received and imported and exported.
Right. Okay, so basically that means I have $10,000 and I need to get my cousin in India $10,000, but I don't have an account here, but my family needs it. Therefore, I call my friend who may have the money in India, and that friend will give that family member of mine $10,000. And I pay a family member of his here in the United States that $10,000. So does that, you see the kind of, I wish I had a diagram where I could explain that to you visually, but basically it's all done through, there's no paper trail on this. It's just, I give a friend of my family, I give someone over here $10,000 who happens to be related to the person who I owe money in India $10,000. So it's sort of done through friends and families and channels that way. It's not. It's basically a wire transfer through phone calls and just friends. And why that's important is because it's another way that money is getting laundered. So you were talking about Mercedes, who's I gave that example of Mercedes. There's lots of Mercedes out there. And the way that they go ahead and launder that money is through these ways like hawalas, where it's not just, it's not just putting it into an account and, they sell the merchandise, they put it into an account and, they transfer money that way. They do it through hawalas, they get it internationally. They also transfer these monies via these, I call it the transfer 2.0. So through the stored value card systems, they maybe put $10,000 on a stored value card system, or a stored value card, which is basically an American Express card or a gift card, and they transfer the money that way overseas. So that's another way that money is getting laundered. And that's, when you're at customs, they're not going to go through your wallet and check through and run every single one of your credit cards to see what those balances are. In fact, I did this, another illegal thing that I did for the book. I put $10,200 on a stored value card, and I took a trip over to India. And that was I just got through customs, no problem. And that was just on an American Express card that I had, and was able to move that money across the border. It's that easy. So I guess what's really, and I'm going to just, I guess what hold on a second, I just wanted to make sure that, so it's, the movement of this money is just that simple. So I think what's really important here, and what the real takeaway is to understand that the way that this money is moving is, evolving. So it's not just with the store value cards, it's not just with hawalas, but it's also through, we know that Facebook is going, and I'm not saying Facebook is doing anything illegal, but I am saying that it's getting easier for people to kind of move money that way, through social media, through Twitter, through these ways of just kind of being technologically advanced that way. And one thing that I really did understand and notice as I was writing this book is that with law enforcement, people aren't evolving as technology is evolving. I think they think that money laundering is happening in this average way that they know of that's happening 10 years ago, but it's evolving much faster. And it's these kids now that are 20 years old that are finding more technologically advanced ways to move this money. So I think that's one way to sort of get ahead of all of that. I have a couple other examples here, but I just wanted to see if anyone had any questions so far about my book or being embedded with law enforcement. I was trying to think of other examples that I had seen while I was out there. I I think that one other example that I wanted to give too is that criminals, you know, in terms of hackers, you've heard of hackers that hack into systems and stuff. There was one hacking incident that happened at Citicorp, and it was a loss. It was the estimated loss at Citigroup. The hack was $2.7 million, and 3,400 customers were affected by this hack of the online security breach. There was also a Sony PlayStation 2 hack, and that was for $170 million. Now, when you think, I understand, you know, we're talking about organized retail crime, we're talking about retail, but we also, to be ahead of these people that are stealing merchandise from us, we have to be ahead of them in terms of technology too, and that means protecting your systems. So the most important thing that you can do, in addition to having people out on your floors and being aware of what's going on, like the Mercedes, is that you have to really protect your systems on the technology side. And whether that means training your force to be up on what Zynga is and what Twitter is and how to use Facebook, or maybe it means employing these 20-year-olds that know these systems and really understand, they can like basically hack into your system and understand where the weakness is so they can explain that to you. But this is where it's going now. As you know, while you might see merchandise being stolen from your floors, it's also going online. And you know, I've covered Saks Fifth Avenue a lot, and I've covered a lot of the retailers at Bloomberg. I know that retail is going on, you know, as we move forward, it's moving more to online. We have this thing, you know, Bloomberg, where we always talk about how it seems like these stores are really just almost showrooms to what's happening online, and that really has some gravitas. But also, loss prevention has to evolve with that as retail is evolving as well. So, I guess, do you guys have any questions so far about, sure.
What was the time frame your book was researched?
I wrote this book, I got greenlit in March of 2010, and I finished it in December of 2010. So I had about 9 months to write it. Yeah, and so I think in that time frame, you know, a lot had happened. But what I thought was also really interesting too when I wrote this book is, and this is why I was involved in all this illegal activity, but I spoke to an FBI agent in Los Angeles, and he was the one that told me if I really wanted to understand how these criminals think, you know, on the organized retail crime side, I had to basically become one and think out of the box. And one takeaway I took away from the book is the fact that it's all about cyberspace. It's all about this technologically advanced way that people are moving merchandise and thus moving money. So as your businesses evolve into this cyber world and get more customers online and you do more business online, I mean, I see, you know, I look at retail businesses at Bloomberg on the, you know, on the business side. I look at how, you know, SG&A costs and CapEx is spent to build up businesses online. I think on the loss and prevention side, that has to be an expense that retailers are spending as well, because human bodies and loss and prevention members on the floor are great, and they can really prevent theft that way. But it's moving online, and unless LMP does it, unless LMP evolves that way, you guys are really going to take a hit to your businesses. So that's one way yeah. Go ahead.
I just want to point out that one of the key things about the wall is the money never leaves the country, and for those of you that are somewhat cyber-related, it's the original public key private key encryption system. I trust Bob, you trust Bob, therefore I trust you. And therefore, we have instant ability to move funds back and forth. And if you ever listen to a long conversations, you don't have to talk about money or move money. You talk about the weather in Las Vegas. It's been 100 degrees today. Or, gee, I hear it's 55 in Colorado tonight. So it's very, very hard to listen to a conversation and figure out what's actually going on.
It is, but and that's one thing that I think we all, and again, Hawalas, I wanted to give that example because I just wanted to show how easy it is for this money to get transferred. Go ahead.
How do you spell that word?
Oh, Hawala, I'm sorry.
Does that mean something in language?
I'm going to, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read you the definition that I got from the I think it's actually a definition in the back of my book. So okay, Hawala, it's also known as a hundi, and it's spelled Hawala. It's an informal value transfer system based on the honor of a huge network of money brokers who are located primarily in the Middle East, North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and South Asia. It can also be made up of a network of hawala brokers and hawaliers. Now, a hawala isn't illegal. You know, that's one thing. It's not illegal to function as a wallet, but they are supposed to be regulated. But the problem is that countries, especially overseas, it's very hard to regulate them. So you have all these unregulated wallets and this money that's being transferred overseas. Now, organized retail crime, you know, as you know, it's happening here, it's happening in the United States, but a lot of these organized retail crime groups have ties overseas, and it's very hard to trace. I mean, I saw what this investigation, we were on this one investigation, and we were, you know, this person was being investigated, and from, you know, the research that I was talking to a bunch of different people, and they were saying that what's really difficult is to, for especially the, you know, law enforcement, on the legal side, for example, like the district attorneys, for them to really actually track that money, you know, it's a lot of paperwork, and when you transfer money via stored value cards or hawalas, there's no paper trail. So therefore, they can't say, well, this person stole this amount of money for X amount, is valued at X amount of dollars, and therefore we're going to go after them and persecute them for a $3 million hit for, you know, $3 million worth of jeans or Prilosec OTC or, you know, I'm trying to think of something else that we, you know, T-shirts, for example, because there's no money trail. And so by mentioning hawalas, it's just one other way that this money from your merchandise is being laundered, and it's something to be, you know, aware of.